Welcome back. The Biden administration recently released its first defense budget. Weighing in at $715 billion for Pentagon spending requests, the budget contained large amounts for research, but was dotted with controversial cutbacks. To dig into the details, Military Times' Capitol Hill bureau chief Leo Shane has more.
After a long wait, the Biden White House last week unveiled its budget proposal for fiscal 2022, a $6 trillion plan which includes $716 billion for the Department of Defense. Now that's a slight increase from the current year's defense funding levels, but when you account for inflation, the military ends up losing some spending power in the plan. And that's significant because under President Donald Trump, the military saw hefty budget increases each of the last few years. But Biden has said it's time for a reset in budget priorities for the country, and he's investing more in the State Department and other domestic programs. Republicans on Capitol Hill have already blasted that strategy, saying it doesn't give enough money to counter threats like China and Iran. So what does all of this mean for troops? Well, even with the squeeze on military spending, the defense budget represents the largest single funding total for any agency by far. Under the plan, all troops would receive a 2.7% pay raise starting next January. That's the smallest in 3 years, but it matches the projected growth in private sector raises. And it still means about $800 more next year for junior enlisted troops and about $1,400 more for senior enlisted and junior officers. Troops would also see a 3.1% pay boost in their housing allowance next year. Administration officials also emphasized that the budget includes more child care options at bases for military families, more money for mental health care, more money for sexual assault prevention, climate change modifications for facilities, and diversity improvement efforts throughout the military. All of those are overarching priorities for the administration, in both the Defense Department and in other departments. Military officials have also touted their largest ever request for research and development funding under the budget plan. The budget calls for a small cut in military end strength, a big change from recent years where the services have added a sizable number of new faces. The Army would lose almost 1,000 folks, the Navy and Marine Corps would see cuts of a few thousand. Now that doesn't mean that anyone's getting forced out of the ranks, but it is notable because retention levels are at historic highs, so reenlistment bonuses and other incentives could take a hit as competition for those spots heat up. The Air Force and the new Space Force would both grow under the plan, adding around 2,000 service members each. For a deeper dive into those departments, we turn to Valerie Encina, Senior Air Warfare Reporter for Defense News. Val, the Air Force and the Space Force seem to be the big winners in this plan, with more money and more people than the other services, but it still sounds like we're going to see a lot of cuts there.
Yeah, so the Space Force, it's a very good news story. They're getting a bump on pretty much any measurable way that you could look at this, whether that's, research and development, procurement, manpower. The Air Force, the story is a little bit more mixed. Basically, what the Air Force has decided is, hey, let's sacrifice a little bit of our near-term capability and capacity and hopefully be able to invest in some next-generation capabilities, things like hypersonics, nuclear, next-generation fighter. So they're planning on retiring over 200 aircraft. That's across 8 fleets. Not any one fleet is going to be retired. But, they are asking for about, 40 A-10s to be retired, about 40 F-15s, another 40 F-16s. These are all things that Congress is going to have to look at pretty closely. And the other thing that I think is going to be kind of a tough sell or a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow for industry is that procurement has actually gone down by 12% compared to last year. So the Air Force is continuing to buy things like the F-35, F-15EX, the KC-46 tanker, but then we've also seen them curbing purchases of the combat rescue helicopter. They're not buying as many as they planned last year. They're not buying any Grey Wolf helicopters. They're buying fewer MC-130s for Special Operations Command. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag here.
So what does all that mean in terms of capability and readiness? I mean, at 200 aircraft, can the Air Force keep fighting with that kind of sizable cut across the force?
Yeah, so I think what the way that they're thinking about it is, hey, we're leaving Afghanistan and we're really pivoting hard toward the Chinese threat. So it's time to make some big changes, to take some risk. And so that's what they're doing. They're trying to take risk across the entire fleet so that they can recoup some savings and put that money elsewhere. So I think this is going to be really unpopular with Congress. And, with these 200 aircraft that they're trying to retire, I don't think that they're going to be able to accomplish all 200 of them. I think that would be very, very tough for Congress to accept. Even if they get half of that, I think they should consider that a major win. And a lot is going to ride on how good our Air Force officials at making their case about the existing fleet, or what's left of the existing fleet after these cuts are made, in order to fight any sort of contingency that would pop up.
All right, so that's what's going out. What's coming in? What is the Air Force buying new under this plan that airmen and pilots should know about?
So, I mean, it's, some of it is a lot of the same. So F-35s, KC-46 tankers, F-15EX fighters. One thing that is brand new for the entire Defense Department is the Air Force is actually the first service to buy hypersonic missiles that are going to be put into operations. So that missile is called Arrow. They're planning on fielding that next year. And that's going to be an air-to-air weapon that will be carried on aircraft like the B-52 or maybe F-15EX. So that's new. That's a really good news story. They're putting a lot of money into nuclear, next generation nuclear assets. So the Biden administration is going to take another look at the nuclear arsenal, probably do another nuclear posture review. But the Air Force is not slowing down any of its modernization programs. It's put a lot of money towards the ground-based strategic deterrent, which is the next generation intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're putting a lot of money into B-21, the new bomber, to keep that going. And then they're also putting a lot of money toward the long-range standoff weapon, which is a nuclear missile that can be used at, by aircraft like the B-52 that won't be able to penetrate into enemy airspace, but can stand off and still fire that missile. So those are sort of the big winners.
Well, there's a lot to break down there. I know you're going to be tracking that all year long. Val, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Leo.
And for a closer look at the rest of the defense budget plan, I sat down with Joe Gould, our Congressional Bureau Chief for Defense News. Joe, thanks for joining us. The administration has talked about everything that's in this proposal, but I know the Defense Department has lost a lot of things in here. Talk about what's gotten cut with some of these reductions in defense spending.
Sure. There's about $2.8 billion in equipment that DoD is not going to buy in the proposed budget. Alongside a number of Air Force platforms, we've got 8 ships total for shipbuilding. That means one fewer destroyer, a handful of littoral combat ships getting cut, 37 Navy aircraft getting cut. As far as the Army goes, they protected modernization. However, they're going to get back about $3.2 billion that would have been spent in Afghanistan.
All right, so it's a lot of equipment that's not going to get bought here. How is that being taken at the Pentagon? How's that being taken on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think this is beyond what the Pentagon has asked for previously, but we know a number of these cuts have been are some things that the Pentagon's asked for, and we know how the Hill feels about some of those because the Hill's rejected them in the past.
Yeah, and I know Republicans have already said this is too deep. This puts us on bad footing. I mean, what are you hearing there?
Sure. For weeks now, we've been hearing from Republicans that they want to see a 3 to 5% increase above inflation. So they feel that this is inadequate. It's what they think is needed to counter China. And then on the flip side, you have progressives, progressive Democrats who feel like the budget is too high. They'd much rather see that money spent on domestic priorities, particularly after the pandemic.
Well, so I was going to say, Republicans, they mattered during the Trump administration when they held the White House and they held the Senate. Now Democrats hold both chambers of Congress and the White House. Shouldn't it be easy to pass this budget? Shouldn't they all be on the same page?
You would think, but Democrats aren't on the same page with each other. So what that means is that they don't really have a majority there. And so what we've seen in recent years is that moderate Democrats have teamed up with Republicans, and they chart a course together. However, this year the budget came in very late, so it's a compressed time frame and sort of a difficult path to get this thing passed.
So we're looking at maybe Christmas passing this budget? What does that mean if they're that far behind the start of the new fiscal year, which is October 1st?
Right. So if we're behind, it means that they've got to pass stopgap measures, extensions, a continuing resolution is what it's called, in order to keep the government open to avoid a government shutdown. However, on the flip side, that means no new programs getting started. And so that's a lot of uncertainty for the defense establishment, defense firms, the Pentagon, service members to absorb in a new year with a new president.
So everything folks were hoping might start this fall could slip till Christmas, past Christmas, maybe even next year.
Who knows? Let's
All
wait
right.
and find out.
Sounds like a lot for you to keep covering. Sounds like a lot for me to keep covering in the months to come.
Thanks, Leo. That's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.